Hello everyone, reporting today for Fun Robotics Network. I'm Abbas, and with me here is Team 23641, Cuberobot from Palo Alto, California. They currently hold the top 3 autonomous world records in official competition. They were the first robot to get 21 artifacts in auto, top team in California, first team to have the gate intaking, just the best autonomous robot right now at this point in the DECODE season. I can't wait to jump into their robot, learn about how they have all these consistent and high scoring programs and more coming up on this Behind the Bot.
This video on fun is brought to you by viewers like you and also in partnership with the following. Take on the DECODE season with Robotics, featuring their FTC starter bot, new 6mm hex shaft and motor options, and updated bevel gears. FTC teams can receive a 25% discount and apply for grants at studica.com/robots. For over 100 years, Kettering University has offered a better education because from day one, that education has been built on hands-on, co-op learning. Kettering's impressive alumni network includes founders, presidents, CEOs, and frontrunners who have a reputation for transforming industries with their resolute leadership. Apply today at kettering.edu/first.
Alright, Cuberobot, so first thing I want to ask you guys has to do with that super wide intake. You know, I think you guys were the first gate intaking robot that I saw this season. At what point in the season did you decide that this was the strategy to go off of?
I think very early on in mid-October, we realized that, you would run out of the spike marks pretty quickly, so you would need a way to recycle balls, and the easiest way is just to get them right as they come out of the gate. So we our first robot was partially designed with that in mind.
Got it. And specifically with that intake bar, you guys have a very narrow robot, but the intake itself spans the entire robot. Was this intentional, or did it just kind of happen? Walk me through that form factor decision.
Yeah, there's really no point in making the robot really wide. It just makes it heavier and slower and just harder to maneuver. So we just made the intake the full width so that we could keep the robot as narrow as possible.
Got it, yeah. If you can show us just a shot of you intaking, then we'll jump into some specific questions about that ramp and ensuring consistency during gate intaking. That'd be great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So talking about that gate intaking, as far as sensorization goes, how do you guys ensure that you leave with 3 artifacts each time you go to the gate?
Yeah, so for the most part, it's time-based because the most important part for us to gain ranking points is parking. So we don't necessarily measure, but we know that the first one takes less time, and we've just kind of empirically tuned it through videos.
Okay, got it, yeah. And as far as, motions with this intaking, is the arm completely passive? Like that front bar, is it completely passive, or is it actuated?
Yeah, it's completely passive.
Yes.
Okay.
It can go up, yeah.
And is it sprung? Like, have you guys had to tune the stiffness of those springs, or it's just gravity weighted down?
It's just gravity, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, now jumping into the transfer and kind of uptake you guys have. You have a very compact robot. How were you able to package this so compactly and make sure that the artifacts had to travel as little as possible? If we can see the front of your robot, that'd be great.
So the balls just go up this ramp right here, and we have a lash to stop them from going into the shooter. And yeah, that's about it. It's just a ramp, and we have a second axle here with more surgical tubing, so it just kind of propels it along the arc.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if we could see kind of in and down up the robot, during this next question, that would be great. How, as far as dead spots go, and making sure that 2 artifacts don't get jammed right in the front, were there any special things you guys had to do to make sure that didn't happen?
Not really. Just if the robot drives away, it'll turn slightly usually, and that's enough to just for the one artifact to go in before the other one.
Okay, I see. Yeah, and now talking about your turret, is it servo powered, motor powered? Let's start with that.
Yeah, it's powered by a motor right here, and I think the final RPM is 120.
Okay, so that means then it's a 1 motor intake, 1 motor turret, and 2 motor shooter. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I see. And as far as homing and tracking goes, are you able to have full 360-degree tracking of your turret, or is it currently limited because of wiring or something else?
Yeah, we have full 360 degrees. So you can see usually our wiring starts like this, and then we can have it rotate the entire way.
Okay, yeah. As far as being able to do that wiring, any advice you have to teams that are looking to make sure their turrets do have the full range?
It just takes a lot of time, like trying attaching it in different places, possibly putting bad drills in different places, and eventually, just after testing a lot, you'll be able to find something that works.
Okay, cool, yeah. Now, jumping into the shooter, you guys have a very unique counter roller shooter. We've seen some teams try this more and more. Have you had the counter roller the entire season, or did you add it after seeing a need for it?
So our first shooter did not have a counter roller, but we noticed that a lot of shots bounced out. So yeah, our next shooter we added counter rollers, and they've helped a lot, and we don't really have many bounce outs anymore.
Got it, yeah. If we can see an up close shot of those, that would be like fantastic. Are you guys running only 2 counter rollers? And if so, why'd you decide just 2?
Well, we tried using one, and it was a little bit inconsistent, so we added the second one, and it made it more consistent, and we just didn't feel a need to complicate things by adding a third one.
As far as speeds go, are you running these so that the surface speed of the rear counter roller is exactly matched to the surface speed of the front roller, or is there some discrepancy between those speeds?
I think the surface speed of the counter roller is about half that of the surface speed of the main roller, and that just because some spin doesn't really cause bounce outs. It's only if you have a lot of spin that the balls bounce out.
I see. And so was that just like because of gearing limitations, you just couldn't run those rollers fast enough, or why did you decide that half speed?
Really small.
Yeah, they're really small rollers, so we would have had to gear it up a lot to make the surface speeds the same.
That makes sense. And as far as like the RPM of your actual front wheel, what diameter is it, and typically around what RPM are you launching at now?
So this is a 6,000 RPM shooter. The diameter is 72 millimeters. We use 72 millimeter gecko wheels. Rhino wheels, sorry. And we're usually launching it at about half power, so around 50 RPM. I mean 3,000 RPM, and a bit less, so maybe 2,000 RPM.
Okay, got it. Yeah, and as far as adjusting the RPM for close and far launch zones, do you have hood adjustment as well, or is it purely just based off of the RPM?
We'll adjust our pitch. So from the far zone, we want like a more flat shot, so we'll increase this, and we'll also up the speed. And so yeah, we change both.
And determining these angles and speeds, how are you guys going about doing that?
Yeah, so we just use an interpolated lookup table right now. It's worked pretty well for us, just 2 separate ones for the pitch and for the speed.
And as far as number of data points go, how many data points around the field did you have to collect for you to be happy with the results on this?
Yeah, I believe that we have around 12, but before competitions, we like to increase that to like 20 or so.
Okay, and as far as differences between shots in the same cycle, are you changing your angle or your speed or anything like that between shots, or are you checking to make sure that you're at the correct angle and speed, or do you just rapid fire as fast as you can?
We just kind of shoot them as fast as we can. The speed drops are not just negligible.
Got it. And I see you guys also have, shooting on the move, or shooting while moving, that we see all the time during your autonomous programs. So walk me through the basis for that.
Yeah, so essentially we have a vector that goes towards the goal, and we have a robot velocity vector. We're going to project the robot velocity vector onto the goal vector, so we can get the velocity going just towards the goal. That's like the radial velocity. And we subtract this vector from the original velocity vector to get the tangential velocity. For the radial velocity, we'll just compensate with our speed and hood, and for the tangential, we'll just move our turret slightly. Yeah.
Okay, and so to move your turret based off of that velocity, are you just using the artifact's time of flight, or how are you accounting for the amount that turret angle needs to change?
Yeah, we're just doing time of flight and then calculating the next angle that we should be at.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. As far as data collection here goes, did you guys, like, what did you have to tune here? Did you have to tune your time of flight calculations? And if so, how'd you go about doing that?
Not really. If you just simulate the artifact with air resistance, you can get a very accurate time of flight, like plus or minus a couple percent. Just simulate it.
Okay, yeah, how did you guys do that simulation? I feel like this is the first time hearing of a team doing air resistance-based simulations.
Yeah, so essentially, air resistance proportional to velocity squared. We can get roughly the exit velocity of our ball, and we can get drag coefficients for the ball, and then we'll simulate it over like 100 time steps, and yeah, by the time we end it, when it reaches the goal, like the distance, yeah, we get a pretty accurate timestamp, and this is pretty close to what we saw in videos when we recorded it, so we saw no need to change the simulation.
Were these simulations run like offline on your computer, like do you have just like a Python or JavaScript, or are they run on the control hub itself during the actual match?
They're run on the control hub. It's just around like a few hundred computations, so it doesn't slow us down.
Okay, wow. So you're running this every single loop. You're doing this. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay, wow, that's pretty cool. Yeah. Now talking about autonomous, I see you guys have the Limelight also. It's interesting to me that it's mounted rigidly on the back of the robot rather than to the turret or anything. So what are you using the Limelight for?
We use the Limelight to relocalize when we notice our position is wrong or our shots are missing.
Got it, yeah. And as far as autonomous goes in general, I think, getting like one auto that does 21 artifacts is not like a huge deal. I mean, it is impressive, but a lot of teams have done it. What you guys have done is you have the top 3 autonomous scores in the world and 4 of the top 5. So how are you able to ensure consistency across matches?
Yeah, so our main thing is our voltage compensation, especially for our drivetrain. We voltage compensate not just because speed is proportional to voltage, but also because of the friction on the ground. And we also do the same kind of voltage compensation on our shooter so that our speed is almost always within plus or minus 1%.
Okay, so is that just like if you have a target speed but your battery voltage is like lower than you expect, you just raise that that desired target speed, or how is that working?
Yeah, we're just gonna multiply by a factor of like whatever voltage that we get from the control hub, and over some sort of nominal voltage.
Got it. And so you're using that in order so that if you have a lower battery, you're sending more power, and if you have a higher battery, you're sending less power to the motors, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's correct.
Awesome. Yeah, I think a lot of teams can learn from like simple tricks like that. Now, another question I have for you guys is, as far as targeting goes, I feel like I've noticed in recent matches, all 3 artifacts will land at a different height. Are you guys trying to do any air sorting like that, or is that something you've played with, or it's just how it's happening in matches and it's not a big issue to like adjust or anything like that?
It's like so once we added counter rollers, that was kind of like a unintended side effect, because we didn't have enough compression on the counter rollers. I think like that's what we thought was a problem. So sometimes it would slip a little bit more than others, so we increased compression to fix that.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
And
we've increased compression since the competition, and it's a bit better now.
okay, yeah. How much compression are you guys running now?
I think the distance between the hood and the counter rollers to the main flywheel is 115 millimeters.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Yeah, that's super informative. As far as driver practice goes, are there any big automations that you have besides like turret tracking and things like that you think like really level up your teleop gameplay?
Our driver controllers are really simple. There's just one button. You just drive around with joysticks, and there's one button to shoot. In terms of automations, we can drive to the gate as well as our park zone.
Okay, wow, yeah. Are you using those frequently, or is that something that you're just using in practice, but using them in matches is kind of difficult?
It's something we're experimenting with.
Okay, Yeah, that makes sense. And now I guess the next question I have is, as deciding between close and far launch zone shooting, do you guys have a preference? How do you practice to make sure you can do both of these, or do you guys just stick to just the close launch zone?
Yeah, so a lot of times we'll prefer the far launch zone because our throughput is the exact same from close and for far. And we've tuned them again with the same lookup table to make sure that we can shoot pretty accurately from far as well. We don't really have a preference.
Okay, got it. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Cuberobot, thank you guys so much. I mean, you guys just have like one of the best autonomous programs in the world, and I think you've really explained well how you're able to get that consistency. So, reporting for Fun Robotics Network, I'm Abbas, and this is Team 23641, Cuberobot. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell to stay up to date on future fun videos. For over 100 years, Kettering University has offered a better education because from day one, that education has been built on hands-on, co-op learning. Kettering's impressive alumni network includes founders, presidents, CEOs, and frontrunners who have a reputation for transforming industries with their resolute leadership. Apply today at kettering.edu/first. Take on the DECODE season with Studica Robotics, featuring their FTC starter bot, new 6mm hex shaft and motor options, and updated bevel gears. FTC teams can receive a 25% discount and apply for grants at studica.com/robots.